Get out. You're done here. Did you really think someone like you, no degree, no credentials, could keep running this place forever? Those were the words my father said to me in front of the entire office on the day he handed everything I had built over to my younger brother's freshly graduated son. I had given that company 15 years of my life, 15 years of early mornings, missed vacations, and weekends spent at my desk while everyone else was living theirs. And in under 60 seconds, my father erased all of it. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by the time he said those words, I had already made a phone call that would change everything. 3 months later, my phone showed 112 missed calls from him. I didn't answer a single one. My name is Claire Harmon, and this is how it happened. Growing up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, our family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. My father, Gerald, ran a mid-sized logistics and freight coordination company he had founded in his 30s. Nothing glamorous, but solid. He was proud of it the way men of his generation are proud of things they built with their hands and their stubbornness. My mother, Linda, handled the administrative side of the business for years before stepping back for health reasons. She wasn't cruel, but she was passive in the way that lets cruelty happen. She watched things unfold and called it staying out of it. Then there was my brother, Dennis. Dennis was 4 years younger than me, charming in the way that works well at parties and poorly in sustained effort. He went to college, studied business, graduated, and spent most of his 20s drifting between jobs that sounded impressive on paper but never lasted longer than 2 years. He had a son, Ryan, from a relationship that ended badly. Ryan was 23 years old, had just finished a business degree at a decent state university, and had never held a real job in his life. I, on the other hand, had not gone to college. Not because I wasn't capable, my high school grades were fine, but because when I graduated, the business needed someone immediately, and my father asked me to step in temporarily while he found a proper hire. That temporary became permanent the way those things always do. 1 year dissolving into the next until 15 years had passed and I was the one running daily operations, managing vendor relationships, overseeing a team of 22 people, and keeping the company profitable through 2 recessions and a global shipping crisis. I had no degree. I had something better. I knew every moving part of that business the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not from textbooks, but from having my hands inside it for 15 years. My father never once said thank you, not directly. The closest he ever came was a nod across the conference table when I landed a contract with a regional grocery chain that tripled our distribution volume. A nod. I told myself it meant something. I was good at telling myself things like that back then. The favoritism toward Dennis was something I had made peace with years ago, or at least learned to carry without letting it show. Dennis could do no wrong in my father's eyes. Every job Dennis quit was the employer's fault. Every failed venture Dennis attempted was the economy's fault or bad timing or bad luck. Meanwhile, every success I produced was simply expected, categorized mentally by my father under the heading of things the company was owed for giving me a chance without a degree. When Ryan was born, I was 21. I adored him immediately. I became the aunt who showed up, the one who took him to baseball games and helped him with school projects and drove him to his SAT prep classes when Dennis couldn't be bothered. Ryan and I were close. I thought that meant something too. As Ryan got older and moved through college, my father's attention locked onto him with an intensity I had never seen directed at anyone except Dennis in his prime years. Ryan was sharp, no question. He had charisma, asked good questions, and could talk about business strategy with real fluency. My father started calling him the future of the company before Ryan had ever set foot in the building as an employee. I didn't feel threatened. I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't name yet. Ryan graduated in May. By June, my father had already decided what came next and apparently told everyone except me. The first sign that something was wrong came from my colleague, Marcus Webb. Marcus had been with the company for 11 years, handling our carrier partnerships and freight rate negotiations. He was the kind of person who hears things and says nothing until he decides you need to know. One Thursday afternoon in late June, he stopped by my office, closed the door, and sat down. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to act normal afterward, because I don't know the full picture and I don't want to make things worse." He told me that during a management lunch he hadn't been meant to attend. He had overheard my father telling our operations director that Ryan would be coming on as co-director, with a transition plan to move him into full directorship within 18 months. My father had used the phrase fresh perspective and proper education in a way that made clear the contrast he was drawing. I thanked Marcus. I told him I appreciated it. I waited until he left, and then I sat very still for about 5 minutes. Then I got back to work, because there was always work to get back to. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I think it matters. I did not immediately go to my father and demand answers. I did not make a scene or send a loaded email or pull Dennis aside and ask what he knew. I decided to wait and see, and while I waited, I did what I had always done. I worked. I also started paying attention differently. I noticed that Ryan was brought into meetings I hadn't invited into. I noticed that my father started CC King Ryan on email threads that had previously been mine alone. I noticed that when clients called the main line, the receptionist had been given new instructions to introduce Ryan as the incoming director. Incoming director. I found that out from a client, Susan Aldridge, who ran a regional hardware supply chain and had worked with me exclusively for 6 years. She called me directly, confused, asking whether she should be scheduling her quarterly reviews with Ryan going forward. Absolutely not, I said, keeping my voice steady. You work with me. Nothing has changed on our end. I hung up and wrote down what she had told me. I kept writing things down. I kept showing up. I kept doing the job that kept the company moving. And I started quietly and without announcing it to anyone, making other preparations. I had a contact named Patricia Doyle. Patricia ran a mid-sized logistics consulting and coordination firm 2 states over in Indiana. Not a competitor, a different market segment, but someone I had built a genuine professional relationship with over 7 years of industry events and mutual referrals. We had talked more than once about what it might look like if I ever came aboard. Those conversations had always been hypothetical. I called Patricia in early July. I told her things were shifting at my father's company and I wanted to revisit our old conversation. She said she had been waiting for me to call. We didn't make any formal commitments. We didn't need to. The conversation ended with an open door and a clear understanding on both sides. Then I went back to work and waited. The moment I had been bracing for came in August. My father organized what he called a company celebration dinner, ostensibly to mark a strong second quarter. The whole office was invited. I helped coordinate the venue because, as usual, the details fell to me. Marcus found me before the dinner and said quietly, "I think tonight is the night. Be ready." I appreciated the warning. I wasn't ready. The dinner started well enough. The restaurant was nice. People were laughing. Ryan sat at the head table next to my father, wearing a suit that looked expensive. He caught my eye at one point and gave me a small, uncomfortable smile. I smiled back. I wasn't angry at Ryan. I want to be clear about that. Ryan was 23 years old and had been handed something by adults who should have known better. That wasn't his sin to carry. About halfway through the meal, my father stood up, tapped his glass, and gave a short speech about the company's future. He talked about legacy. He talked about leadership. He talked about the importance of proper credentials and formal education in a world that was growing more complex and competitive every year. I watched my water glass. Then he turned to me. For one brief embarrassing moment, the small part of me that had never fully given up, the part that kept surviving on the theory that 15 years had to mean something to him, that part thought maybe he was about to say something real, something true, something that acknowledged what I had given. Instead, he said, clearly and in front of everyone, "Claire, I think it's time we were honest about the direction this company needs to go. Ryan has the education and the vision this business needs now, effective immediately. He'll be taking on your responsibilities as Director of Operations. We'll find you something more suitable to your background." Something more suitable to your background. I put my fork down. The table had gone very quiet. Marcus started to say something. My father cut him off before he finished a sentence. 2 other colleagues exchanged looks I recognized as helplessness. Dennis stared at the tablecloth. Ryan said, "Grandpa, maybe this isn't this is exactly the right time," my father said. "We've been too polite about it for too long." I stood up. I did not cry. I want to be specific about that because people sometimes assume that when a woman walks away from something that has gutted her, there must be visible falling apart. There wasn't. Something in me had gone very quiet, the way pain sometimes goes quiet when it exceeds a certain threshold and becomes something else entirely, something cold and clear and purposeful. "Thank you for 15 years of opportunity," I said. I kept my voice even. I'll have my office cleared by end of week. That's probably for the best, my father said. I nodded to my colleagues. I looked at Ryan one more time. He looked stricken and I almost felt sorry for him. Then I walked out of that restaurant alone and sat in my car in the parking lot, and for exactly 6 minutes, I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia Doyle. She answered on the second ring. I'm ready, I said. I know, she said. Come in Monday. We'll sort out the paperwork then. I spent the following 2 days going through my office quietly. I made sure every handover document was immaculate, not because I owed it to my father, but because the clients and the staff deserved it, and because I had my own professional standards that existed independently of how I had been treated. Some things you keep intact for yourself. What I did not do was say goodbye to the clients. I had made a decision, a careful and deliberate one, that I would not contact any client directly about my departure. I would not ask anyone to follow me. I would not say a word. I didn't have to. The calls started before I had even officially cleared my desk. Susan Aldridge called first. She had heard through the receptionist. She asked where I was going, and I told her I was moving to a new firm. She said, without hesitation, that she was moving her account with me. Over the next 10 days, before I had started my first full week at Patricia's firm, I received similar calls from 9 other major accounts. I told each one of them the same thing, that I was grateful, that the decision was entirely theirs, and that I would not be asking or encouraging them to do anything. They didn't care. They had made up their minds. Those 10 accounts represented, as I later learned, approximately 41% of my father's company's annual revenue. I started at Patricia's firm on a Monday. The work was familiar in structure but energizing in a way my father's company hadn't been for years, because I was finally in an environment where what I brought to the table was recognized as an asset rather than tolerated as a convenience. Patricia introduced me to her team as a senior partner. I hadn't expected the title. I stood there and accepted it and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, something close to being seen accurately. Marcus resigned from my father's company 2 weeks after I left. He called to tell me and I thanked him, but I told him I hoped he had left for his own reasons rather than mine. He said it was both, and I respected his honesty. 4 other team members followed in the weeks after that. Ryan, from what I heard through Dennis, who had the decency to call me twice, which I appreciated, was struggling. He was technically competent in the ways his degree had trained him, but he had no relationships with the carriers, no institutional knowledge of how the contracts actually worked in practice, and no understanding of the informal trust structures that held the client relationships together. He worked hard. That's what Dennis told me, and I believed it. But hard work without context is just effort without traction. My father called me for the first time approximately 3 weeks after my departure. I saw his name on my phone and felt nothing in particular, which surprised me. I let it go to voicemail. Over the following 6 weeks, the calls accumulated. I counted them at some point 114 over roughly 8 weeks. Most went to voicemail. A handful I listened to. The content shifted from demanding to confused to something that might have been apologetic if my father had been built differently. One voicemail said, with no apparent self-awareness, "The clients are leaving and Ryan can't handle it alone, and I think you know what you're doing by not calling back, Claire. So if you want to come back and fix this, there's still a position for you here. Still a position for you here." I deleted that one immediately. Dennis called more consistently. We had real conversations. He told me our father was frightened, that the client departures had cascaded further than anyone had anticipated, that some of the vendor contracts had lapsed because the relationships behind them had been mine to maintain and no one knew how to renew them. He told me Ryan had started looking at other opportunities. I told Dennis I was sorry he was caught in the middle. I meant it. Dennis had his faults, plenty of them, but he had never been directly cruel to me, and he was genuinely distressed. "I should have said something sooner," he said once near the end of one of those calls. "I knew what Dad was planning for months." "I know," I said. A long pause. "Are you angry at me?" "I'm tired," I said honestly. "But no, not at you." Ryan left the company in month 4. He took a position at a larger logistics firm where he could learn from the ground up rather than being dropped into the deep end by someone who loved him but didn't understand what he was asking of him. I heard later that he was doing well, learning properly, building something real. I was glad. I had always liked Ryan. I still do. My father's company filed for bankruptcy protection 9 months after my departure. The combination of lost client revenue, lapsed contracts, and the costs of rapid staffing turnover had created a hole that couldn't be managed. My father, from what Dennis told me, was devastated. Not in a way that had changed him, but in the way that damage happens when someone's life's work collapses and they still can't quite identify their own role in the collapse. He was working part-time consulting for a freight brokerage. My mother was managing a small retail outlet's back-office accounts. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. There's a version of this story where I feel pure, clean satisfaction watching the consequences land, and I would be lying if I said there was nothing at all. But mostly, I felt the specific sadness of watching something fail that didn't have to. The company had been real. The work had mattered. 22 people had lost jobs that weren't peripheral to their lives. That wasn't nothing, even if the decisions that caused it weren't mine. What I felt most, when I let myself feel it fully, was relief. Not at their failure. At my own freedom. Here's something I've thought about a lot in the time since. The thing my father never understood, and I mean never, not even at the end, was that a business is not a credential. A business is a web of relationships and trust and specific knowledge accumulated over time. You cannot hand that web to someone else like an object. You cannot transfer 15 years of knowing which vendor needs a personal call versus an email, which client account needs extra attention in Q3, which contracts have informal flexibility written into them that never made it into the official language. That knowledge lived in me. When I left, it left with me. A business degree is extraordinarily valuable. I don't say any of this to diminish education. Ryan's formal training gave him frameworks that I had to build for myself slowly and imperfectly over years. But a degree is a set of tools. What I had was the structure the tools were meant to build. They are not the same thing, and confusing them cost my father everything he had spent 30 years creating. Marcus and I have stayed in touch. He landed well, a larger firm, better compensation, actual appreciation for what he brings. He texted me when he heard about my father's company and asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than okay. Patricia and I are building something together that I'm genuinely proud of. We've brought on 3 of the former client accounts as long-term contracts, and our division has grown faster in 18 months than either of us projected. She told me recently, after a particularly good quarter, that she'd been hoping I would call for years. "Why didn't you just ask me?" I said. She smiled. "Because you needed to get there yourself." She was right. I think that's true of most things worth arriving at. Dennis and I talk regularly now, more than we ever did when I was at the company. There's something clarifying about a crisis. It removes the performances people put on and leaves you with what's actually there. What's actually there with Dennis is someone who loves his son and feels the weight of having not been braver at the moments that mattered. He's working on it. I appreciate that he's working on it. Brian called me once about a year out. He apologized. Genuinely, specifically, in a way that showed he had thought carefully about what he was apologizing for rather than issuing a general. He said he hadn't understood when his grandfather had presented everything to him, the full shape of what was happening. He said he wished he had listened to his instinct that night at the dinner and spoken up more loudly. "You tried?" I said. "Not hard enough." "No," I agreed. "But you know that now, that's worth something." We got dinner a few weeks later. It was easy in a way I hadn't expected. He told me about his new position. I told him about the work at Patricia's firm. He asked good questions. He always did ask good questions. That was always the thing about Ryan. He just needed to be somewhere that let him build properly instead of somewhere that set him up to fail spectacularly in service of someone else's pride. My father has not called in several months. The last voicemail, which I listened to and then deleted, was different from the others. Quieter. He said he had been thinking about things. He said he thought maybe he had made mistakes. He didn't say what they were, specifically. He didn't say he was sorry. Not exactly. But something in the tone was different, an absence of the certainty that had always characterized everything he said to me. I haven't called back. I don't know if I will. I'm not carrying rage about it. I'm not waiting for a particular outcome. I'm just living my life, which is more than I was doing before, and I'm letting that be enough for now. There's a thing people say about proving yourself to the people who doubted you, that the best revenge is success, that you should live well and let that speak. I've heard that in 100 different forms. I understand the comfort of it, but I think the more accurate version, the one that actually holds up, is this. You build well because building well matters and because you have standards you keep for yourself. If the people who doubted you eventually see it, that's fine. If they don't or can't, that's fine too. The work is the point. The relationships you build and keep. The people who show up for you because you showed up for them and because trust, once genuinely earned, has a kind of gravity that no one can take away by reassigning your job title. I think about something Marcus said the day he stopped by my office to warn me. He said he didn't know the full picture and didn't want to make things worse. He didn't have the full picture. Neither did I, not yet. But I had enough to get ready. Enough to make one phone call, enough to know that whatever happened next, I wasn't going to be left without options. That's the thing about 15 years of real work. It doesn't disappear when someone tells you to leave. It goes with you, every single bit of it. I picked up my phone on a Tuesday morning in November. Cool day, good coffee, light coming through the office windows in a way that made everything look clean and possible, and I saw 114 missed calls from my father in my recent history. I scrolled through them once slowly. Then I set my phone face down on my desk, pulled up the quarterly projections I had been working on, and got back to the work I loved. I've thought a lot about what really happened, not just to me, but to my father, to Ryan, to the company itself. And the more I sit with it, the clearer one thing becomes. None of this was random. Every outcome in this story was the direct result of choices, actions accumulated over years until they reached a weight that couldn't be held up any longer. And then everything collapsed under exactly what had built it. My father spent 15 years treating my work as something owed to him rather than something given. He treated loyalty as a resource to be extracted rather than a relationship to be honored. He mistook a credential, a piece of paper, for the living, breathing thing that actually keeps a business alive. Trust, knowledge, and the specific human connections that take years to build and seconds to lose. When he made his decision that August night, he didn't just lose an employee. He cut the roots out from under everything he had planted and then stood there confused when it fell. That is how cause and effect works. Not as punishment handed down from somewhere above, just as the plain, unsentimental logic of how things actually function. You treat people as disposable, and eventually the most valuable ones leave. You confuse the symbol of competence with competence itself, and eventually the gap between symbol and reality breaks open into something you can't manage. There is no mystery in it. There is only consequence following action, as it always does, as it always will. What I want people to take from Claire's story, from my story, is this. Integrity is not a strategy. I didn't maintain my professional standards during my exit because I calculated that it would help me later. I did it because I had decided a long time ago that my standards existed independently of how I was treated. That distinction matters enormously. When you do the right thing because it serves you, it is not really integrity, it is just good tactics with a respectable name. Real integrity holds when it costs you something, it holds when the person watching is only you, and intelligence, real intelligence, is not what gets handed to you in a classroom, as important as learning is. It is the capacity to observe accurately, to reason honestly, to learn from what is actually in front of you rather than what you expected or hoped to find. Ryan had academic intelligence and had been failed by the adults around him who never let it develop into wisdom. He needed time, context, and the humility to start from the ground up. When he finally got that, he flourished. That tells you everything. Resilience, though. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that looks heroic from the outside. The quiet, private kind that shows up as getting back to work after 6 minutes in a parking lot, as making one phone call instead of making a scene, as building something new without needing the people who hurt you to witness it or acknowledge it or apologize for it first. That kind of resilience doesn't announce itself. It just keeps moving. I am still moving, and that more than anything else is the point.